So let me ask you, if you had a chronic bacterial illness, wouldn't you be desperate to get rid of it? If you had some kind of disease that was probably ultimately going to kill you, wouldn't you be super desperate to get rid of it? Wouldn't you be willing to do whatever it took to get rid of it? So I've been reading in 2 Kings, and I was reading chapter 5, and I just made some observations that I wanted to share. And some of these observations made me feel like a jerk. They made me kind of say, these people in the story here, they're kind of being jerks right now. And then it made me think, yeah, but I definitely know that I have kind of made those same mistakes, and so maybe I'm just a jerk sometimes too, and I need to be more humble. And as you know, I like to just share these devotionals and talk to you about kind of what I'm learning and what God's laying on my heart, just in hopes that it would be food for thought for you and just maybe encourage you somehow. So in 2 Kings chapter 5, Naaman has leprosy, and Naaman talks to the king of Syria, and he's kind of high up in the rank and is friends with the king of Syria. And the king of Syria says, you need to go to the king of Israel. He's going to be able to help you. And there's actually a girl in the story, a little girl, and that could be a whole other kind of thing to unpack. But she says, you need to go find Elisha the prophet in Israel. That too can heal you. So Naaman goes to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel says, I can't help you. You need to find Elisha. So he goes and he finds Elisha. And he knocks on Elisha's door, and Elisha does not even come out. He just says, you need to go dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times and you will be healed. Naaman did not want to go down to the river. He was very surprised that was Elisha's response. He was kind of mad that Elisha would not even come out and talk to him. He expected him, I think, maybe to just wave his hand and fix it. Chapter 5 verse 11 says, Naaman was wroth and went away and said, behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. So he was mad. He was thinking, he's not even going to come out and talk to me. What's going on? And that's kind of was hard for me to imagine when I was reading it. If I had this, bacterial chronic disease, I feel like I would be desperate to get rid of it. And going and getting in the river seems like a pretty simple, easy fix. But then I thought about, don't I do the same exact thing? Jesus promises to cleanse and save us, but then how many times do I say, well, I want that, but I just don't know that I want everything else that goes along with it. Now, this could be true for people who have not accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior, but it could also be true for people who have been saved for years. It's very easy for us to say we have a problem and we want to take it to God, but then we want to remain in control because maybe we won't like the solution that He has to offer. So maybe I want to serve God, but can I just leave out that part about love my neighbors because I've got some neighbors that annoy me? Or I really want to serve God and I want Him to help me with this problem, but I don't want to give up this certain sin. Or how can I not covet what my neighbor has? You know what I'm saying. I'm just trying to give examples. I see kind of this selfish nature in myself often, and reading this made me feel like a jerk. I'm looking at Naaman thinking, what's your problem, dude? Go get in the river and get rid of this bacteria and move on with your life. This is awesome. But I definitely see that same pattern in myself. And so the next observation I made was about greed. And I think greed gets the best of all of us at some point or another. But Elisha had a servant named Gehazi. And when Naaman came, he brought gifts with him for the person that was going to heal him, which was Elisha. And Elisha said, I don't want your gifts, just go on. And he did that to show that you can't buy God's favor. Of course, a prophet of God was not going to accept these gifts, but Elisha's servant Gehazi saw these gifts and thought, hey, I want some of that. That's not fair. I want some of that. So he tells Elisha, I need to go off. And he catches up with Naaman down the road and makes up this lie and tells Naaman, Elisha sent me because he's going to have some guests later. He changed his mind. He wants some gifts to give to him. And Naaman says, yeah, no problem. Here's some silver and here's some clothes. Gehazi goes back and hides them. And then Elisha asks him where he's been. Of course, Elisha knows what Gehazi did. Gehazi lies about it. And his punishment in the end was he got the leprosy that Elisha cured Naaman of. So that was a bad punishment in the end, no doubt. But sometimes it's so easy to see certain things that other people are receiving and think, why is that not for me? And sometimes those good things are not meant for us. And that doesn't mean that God is mean to us. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love us, but he has a different plan for each and every one of us. And I know I have been guilty before of looking around at other people and saying, well, I want what they have, or it seems like all these things are happening to them. Where's my breakthrough? Things like that. And it's so important to remember that God has a specific plan for each and every one of us. And it doesn't serve any of us if we look around and we say, yeah, but I want what that person has, or I want what that person has. It helps us to stay in our own lane and know that what God has for us is specifically tailored for us. He has a plan that is for me, for you, for everyone else, and no plans are the same. No plans are duplicates. And when we think about greed, a huge, solution to greed is contentment. And Paul talks about contentment in Philippians, and that always kind of gets me, because if he could be content in a Roman prison, then I try to look around and say, I've got it pretty good. Shouldn't I be content with what I have? But contentment is not being content with what you used to have, what you hope to have. Contentment is right here and right now in this moment, in this season of life. And when you can focus on that and be grateful and really mindful with what the Lord has given you right now, that contentment helps guard against greed. So the last kind of observation that I made was about humility, and arguably really all of these kind of speak to humility. So Naaman didn't want to humble himself. That's why he didn't want to get in the river. And he ultimately did, of course, and he got healed, but he didn't want to, because he thought, I'm a man of some stature, and that just seems beneath me, and why would I get in this river? There's actually other rivers that are way better. And again, it's just crazy to think, if this was your last ditch effort because you had a bacterial disease that was going to kill you, would you really be saying, well, I might have gotten this river but not this one? Blows my mind. But again, I know that I do the same things in my life today that are just like that. And I want to read what his servants said to him, what Naaman's people around him said. And his servants came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? So they're telling him, if he had asked you to do some kind of big complicated thing, you would have done it, but yet you won't get in the river. Wow, this definitely kind of made me feel like a jerk, because sometimes I know me, of course, but I think maybe Christians in general can be guilty of thinking, what is God's purpose for me, and what is his mission for me, and he must have this really big plan for me. And I'm not saying that he doesn't, but just because he doesn't call you to get on a plane and go to Africa to be a missionary does not mean that he doesn't have a plan for you. Maybe his plan for you is to go stop by the homeless person at McDonald's that you see every day and talk to them. Or maybe his plan is someone in your family has just had a baby, and you go to them and say, could I just cook you a meal, or could I wash some laundry, or just do something for you, because I know that you don't have a lot of time. You don't have to have some kind of huge, complicated, complex, life-altering mission to serve God. And some people do, and I think in life sometimes we play both parts. But I think that was a huge reason why Naaman couldn't humble himself, was because he just could not separate what God was going to do or trying to do from what he wanted to happen. And so I've got a few things I want to talk about before we end this video, kind of steps to help us practice humility. So being humble is where obedience to God starts. Obedience to God starts with humility. Humility leads to obedience with God. Those kind of things are one and the same. And the first thing to being humble is just recognizing God's ways are better than ours. He knows way more than we do. His ways are better. It doesn't mean that he thinks we're dumb. It doesn't mean that he thinks we're stupid. It just means he knows what's best. And I'm reminded of how I felt as a child. I've been so fortunate to have such wonderful parents. And sometimes my parents would discipline me or tell me to do stuff that I didn't want to do. But ultimately, even if I complained, and I definitely did, I'm not trying to say I was a perfect kid, I knew that, let me put it this way, I never doubted that they had my best interest in mind. I always trusted them. It was very easy for me to do that. And that's the same way that it should be with us and God. And that reminded me of Isaiah 55:8-9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. God knows more than we do. He can see the long-term plan. He can see it all laid out. And it's just like parents with a little kid. They might be telling them, don't touch that on the stove. It's hot. It will burn you. The kid can't understand. Well, but I just want to touch that. I want to see what it is. But the parent can see into the future. If the kid touches that, they're going to get burnt, right? And so it's the same kind of thing here. Another huge thing with humility is we don't always have to understand God's plan. This is maybe one of the things that has spoke to me the most. I don't have to have a map to follow God and go where he's telling me to go. I don't have to know. And I'm a control freak. If you've been on the channel, you've heard me say that. So I'm always fighting against this feeling of, I want to know what's next and I want to be able to anticipate it. This reminded me of Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So you can't always see what's going on, but you still have to trust. And this goes back to the same analogy of a little kid with parents. Just any kind of example that you can think of. Maybe a little kid wants to go play in the water, but they can't swim yet. And the parents know that's very dangerous. But the kid doesn't understand, well, if I get out past my head and I can't swim, they don't have no concept of what will happen. But the parents do. And a few other things regarding humility. God wants us to be obedient and be humble to him because it's what's best for us. So go back to the example of the parents and the kids. If you let your kids stay up all night and drink Mountain Dew and eat candy, how good are they going to feel for school the next day? Now, it might be fun to stay up all night and drink Mountain Dew and eat candy, but that's not going to be what's best for them. And it's the same thing with us. Being obedient to God and being humble is what's best for us. It's not like God is sitting up there as a puppeteer trying to just manipulate. It's not like that. He is a loving father, a loving parent who just wants what's best for us. And a huge theme that I've seen throughout 1 Kings and in 2 Kings is that God can use anything to accomplish his purposes. So I'm sure he could have had Elisha just wave his hand and heal Naaman. I'm sure that he could have done that. But he needed Naaman to be humbled, because what happens at the end of this is after Naaman is healed, he says, I will only worship the God of Israel. He turns his heart to God. He goes through that experience and then accepts Jesus. So that's what God needed to use Naaman going into the river, having to humble himself so that he would come to Jesus. So God can use anything to accomplish his purposes. Anything. He doesn't just work in the big things. He works in the small things. So lastly, regarding humility, I've used several examples, of a little kid and parents. Sometimes what I think really helps us understand humility is having a childlike faith. So all these examples that I used, it took faith for Naaman to believe that he could just go get in the river and be healed. He had to really have faith that this will work. And sometimes we reject God's grace and His mercy and His plan for us because we think, well, it just can't really be that simple. Well, I'm just not really sure about this. We stand in our own way, and God is standing there freely ready to give us His mercy, His grace, His direction. And so sometimes it helps me to just remember to mentally go back to a childlike faith. Again, I was blessed to have wonderful parents, but when I laid down at night, I was never afraid because I knew my mom and daddy, especially my daddy, is in this house, and I'm not afraid. I remember one time, years and years ago, I don't know, Katie and I must have been 9 or 10 years old, and we were up the creek here with our dad, and it was the middle of the summer, but he always carries a pistol in the woods, and that's just kind of how we were raised, just for safety. We do have bears here. And I remember it was hot, it was in the summer, and all of a sudden we're walking, and he's like, puts his hand out, and he's listening. And he thought maybe he heard a bear, and he said, stay right here, and he went on ahead up the trail. I can remember that clear as day, and I don't remember fear. I was not afraid at all because I knew my dad was right there, and I knew that my dad would protect me. And it's the same thing, having that childlike faith with God, knowing that He is there for us and that He will help us. Therefore, we can humble ourselves and we can accept Him in faith and receive everything, not just His Son, Jesus, who died on the cross, but receive everything that He wants to do for us, that He is asking us to do. So many observations from this chapter, so much to just spiritually unpack in 1st and 2nd Kings. There's just so much. And one thing that I think hugely that it has in common, and then I'm going to wrap this video up, is I just found myself looking and thinking, all these kings that were so evil, and then one would die and the next one would come along, and then he was more evil than the one before. And I just found myself thinking, what in the world? And then the parallel of today, when you look at whether it's local, state, federal, governments, and you think, what the heck? Like, it's just one evil group, one evil person after another. How could it just go on and on and on like this? But they all had one thing in common, and all the people of today have, evil people in places of power have one thing in common. They don't have humility. They don't have God. They've rejected God. All these kings in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, they rejected God. Maybe they started out believing in God. Maybe they said, I don't think so. I'm never going to believe in you to start with. That is where the problem stemmed from. So we have to be mindful of that and consider humility and pride and selfishness and greed and guard against these things and keep God as close as possible. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that maybe you will kind of benefit from some of the observations that I made. And you have to comment below, let me know what you think, and then let me know if you have different observations than what I made. As always, I appreciate you watching. I pray for my YouTube family every day, so feel free to drop prayer requests. God bless you, God keep you, and I will see you on the next one.